The Great Hall of Hogwarts was always a place of quiet wonder, even in the stillness between meals. Long after the last echoes of chatter had faded and the golden plates had cleared themselves, the vast chamber would settle into a serene hush, as though the very walls were sighing in contentment. On this particular evening, the castle had grown drowsy under the embrace of autumn. The air carried a faint, crisp chill, and somewhere in the distance, a gentle wind pressed against the high windows. The enchanted candles floated steadily in midair, their flames swaying ever so slightly, casting soft pools of light upon the worn, polished tables below. Above it all, the great hall's ceiling held its silent vigil, a breathtaking reflection of the world beyond the castle walls. Tonight, it mirrored a deep, velvety night sky, each star shimmering with quiet patience, as though it had been painted there with the gentlest of brushes. Wisps of silvery cloud drifted lazily across the vast dome, lit faintly by the glow of a waxing moon. It was said, and often repeated to wide-eyed first years, that the ceiling was enchanted to reflect the sky outside, an ancient spell cast in the earliest days of Hogwarts. Most students accepted this as fact, a detail woven so seamlessly into the fabric of the school that it hardly called for questioning. But to a few, the ceiling was more than decoration. It was a story waiting to be told. Some whispered that the enchantment was not merely a charm, but a living magic, one that shifted with the moods of the castle itself. Others claimed that on certain rare nights, the ceiling revealed things unseen, constellations that did not exist in the Muggle world, or glimpses of skies far away, as if opening a window to other times and places. Tonight, the great hall was empty, but for a few lingering figures. A pair of portraits along the far wall murmured to each other, their painted faces lit by the glow of candlelight. The rustle of tapestries in the faint breeze and the distant hum of the castle's heartbeat, that subtle blend of creaks, sighs, and echoes, filled the silence with a comforting presence. This was where our story begins, in that quiet moment between day and night, between the familiar and the unknown. For the truth behind the great hall ceiling was older than the castle's very stones, a secret hidden in plain sight. And as you settle in, listening to the gentle turn of time within these walls, perhaps you'll feel it too, the faint stir of magic waiting to be uncovered, soft as the first flicker of dawn. So let us begin. At one of the far tables in the quiet great hall sat three familiar figures, each wrapped in the gentle glow of the floating candles. Harry Potter rested his chin in his hand, his eyes drawn upward to the enchanted ceiling, as if hoping it might give away its secrets. The golden light of the candles brushed against his glasses, catching the faint reflection of the moonlit sky above. He wasn't wearing his school robes now, just a comfortable jumper and worn trousers, the sort of clothes he liked when there was no need for formality. Beside him, Hermione Granger sat with her back straight, but her expression soft, a quill poised above a piece of parchment. She wasn't working on homework this time. Instead, her parchment was filled with small sketches, the outline of the great hall's arches, the sweep of the ceiling's stars. Every so often, she'd pause, her gaze drifting upward, as though trying to match each drawn point of light to its counterpart above. A faint smile touched her lips, the kind that meant her mind was quietly at work. Ron Weasley was slouched comfortably across from them, his long legs stretched out beneath the table, one foot nudging at the other in absent rhythm. He had a half-eaten treacle tart in front of him, a remnant from the evening meal, and his fingers drummed idly against the tabletop. Every now and then, he'd glance at Harry or Hermione with a mix of curiosity and impatience. "So," Ron finally murmured, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want to disturb the calm of the hall. "What exactly are we looking for? You've been staring at that ceiling for the better part of an hour, Harry." Harry gave a small shrug, his voice equally quiet. "Just wondering. I mean, we all know it's enchanted to look like the sky outside, but how? And why?" His eyes narrowed slightly in thought. "It's one of those things no one ever seems to explain." Hermione's quill stilled, and she looked between them, the candlelight catching in her hair. "It's ancient magic, older than any charm taught here now. The enchantment was cast by the founders themselves, or so the records suggest, but there are gaps in the accounts, dates that don't quite match, details left vague." Ron raised an eyebrow. "Vague how?" "Vague as in," she said, lowering her voice. "There are hints it might not just be a reflection of the outside sky. Some believe it shows what the castle wants you to see, or perhaps what you need to see." A soft shiver of interest passed between them, subtle yet undeniable. The great hall seemed to lean in around them, as though the portraits, the candles, and the enchanted ceiling itself were listening. None of them knew it yet, but this quiet conversation, held in the gentle glow of evening, would be the first step toward uncovering a piece of Hogwarts history untouched for centuries, a story written not in books, but in the stars above their heads. The fire in the great hall's hearth had burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft, reddish light that danced lazily along the walls. Outside, the castle lay in the embrace of a quiet night. The distant hoot of an owl and the occasional creak of the old timbers were the only sounds that broke the stillness. Harry leaned back in his seat, still gazing at the ceiling, the stars above him winking gently in the dark blue expanse. He felt a strange pull, as if the ceiling itself was somehow aware of his gaze. Hermione's quill had been set aside, and she too was watching now, her brows drawn together in thought. Ron, though half-focused on his tart, seemed to be following their shared curiosity. It happened quietly, so quietly that at first, Harry thought he was imagining it. A small point of light, brighter than the rest, appeared near the edge of the enchanted sky. It shimmered for a moment, then began to drift slowly, almost deliberately, across the ceiling. Its movement was unlike any star he had ever seen in the Muggle night sky, not quick like a shooting star, not fixed like the constellations. This one meandered, pausing as though deciding where to go next. "Did you see that?" Harry whispered. Hermione's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, it's moving." Ron craned his neck, squinting. "Maybe it's just part of the enchantment, for decoration." But Harry shook his head. "No, it's different. Look at how it's glowing. The point of light slowed until it hovered directly above the center of the great hall where the four long tables met. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, casting a faint silver hue across the stone floor. Then, almost imperceptibly, the surrounding stars began to shift as well, not in their usual slow celestial drift, but in coordinated motion, as if forming something. Hermione's hand went to her bag instinctively, pulling out a scrap of parchment. "It's drawing a pattern," she murmured, already sketching what she saw. "This isn't random, it's deliberate." As the three of them watched in rapt silence, the stars in the enchanted ceiling arranged themselves into a shape. At first, it seemed abstract, just lines and curves of light, but gradually, an image began to emerge. It was the outline of an archway, tall and ornate, with curling vines carved along its sides. At the apex of the arch was a symbol, a circle surrounded by four smaller shapes, each glowing in a different color: crimson, blue, yellow, and green. Ron leaned closer to Hermione's drawing. "Those look like the house colors, don't they?" Hermione nodded slowly. "Yes, and that symbol in the middle, it's ancient. I've seen it before in one of the restricted section tomes." She glanced at Harry. "It's connected to the founders." Before Harry could ask more, the silver light from the ceiling began to intensify, bathing the great hall in a soft, moonlit glow. The air seemed to hum faintly, a vibration they could feel more than hear. Then came a sound, faint at first, like a whisper carried on the breeze. Words began to form, though they were not in English. Hermione's eyes lit up with recognition. "It's old high wizarding," she breathed. "It's very old. Let me..." She tilted her head, listening intently, mouthing the sounds as though translating them in her mind. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but certain. "It says, when the sky shows the arch, follow its light to find the first stone." Harry's gaze swept the hall. "First stone? Of what?" Ron shrugged, though his tone was uneasy. "Hopefully not some giant rock meant to squash us." But Harry's attention had been caught by something else, a faint shimmer near the far wall, just beneath the floating candles. It looked like a patch of the air itself was bending, the way heat rises off stone in summer. Without thinking, he stood and began to walk toward it, his footsteps echoing quietly in the empty hall. The shimmer grew clearer as he approached, revealing a faint outline in the stone wall, an archway, just like the one in the ceiling's image. Harry reached out, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the stone. To his surprise, the air within the arch rippled like water at his touch. "Harry," Hermione called softly, "be careful." "I'm not going through," he reassured her, though his voice carried a note of awe. "But look at this, it wasn't here before." Ron joined him, pressing a palm against the stone. "Feels solid to me." But as Harry withdrew his hand, the glow from the ceiling dimmed slightly, and the shimmer in the archway began to fade. Hermione's gaze darted upward, then back to them. "It's linked to the ceiling. The enchantment is showing us where something is, but only when the stars form the arch." For several moments, they stood in quiet thought, the flickering light wrapping the great hall in its gentle embrace. The ceiling's image held steady, the arch glowing faintly, the house-colored symbols pulsing softly as if waiting for the right moment. Harry exhaled slowly, sensing that this was just the beginning. Whatever this is, it's been here a long time, and I think it wants to be found. Above them, the stars twinkled knowingly, as though the ceiling itself had heard him and approved. The shimmering archway faded slowly from view, leaving only the familiar stone wall behind. Yet the room didn't quite return to normal. The great hall felt expectant. The air had a subtle weight to it now, as though holding its breath. Harry, Hermione, and Ron lingered in the stillness, their eyes drawn upward once more. The ceiling, having shifted into its strange alignment of stars, seemed unwilling to revert to its ordinary reflection of the night sky. The arch of light remained, glowing faintly among the constellations, the four house colors pulsing with an unhurried rhythm. Hermione scribbled a few more notes, the quiet scratch of her quill almost the only sound in the room. "There's more to this," she murmured. "If the enchantment is responding to us, it's not just a display, it's interactive." Ron tilted his head, frowning at the ceiling. "So what? It's like a magical map, but for secret arches?" Hermione didn't look up from her notes. "Not exactly. I think it's showing us stages. The arch in the sky is the first clue, but there's something else it's waiting to reveal." As if to answer her, the glow above them brightened, the stars shifting once again. This time, the archway's shape began to dissolve into a slow cascade of glittering light, like silver sand slipping through invisible fingers. The tiny points of light fell downward in graceful swirls, spiraling toward the center of the hall. Harry took a step back to watch. The sand didn't simply vanish upon reaching the floor. Instead, it pooled in midair, forming a small, floating sphere no larger than a snitch. The sphere shimmered with all the colors of the house symbols they'd seen before, shifting between red, blue, yellow, and green in an endless, slow cycle. Ron's eyes widened. "Blimey, it's like it just dropped part of the sky into the hall." Hermione was already moving closer, though her steps were careful. "Don't touch it just yet," she cautioned, her voice low and reverent. "Let's see what it does on its own." The sphere hovered patiently, spinning so slowly that its motion was almost imperceptible. Then it began to emit a soft hum, not unlike the tone of a singing wine glass, rising and falling in delicate waves. The sound was calming, but also oddly purposeful, like it was calling for something. Harry felt a strange pull in his chest, as though the sound was resonating deep inside him. His thoughts flickered briefly to the sorting hat, how it had seemed to speak to him without words. The sphere's hum had that same quality, intimate and knowing. Then, without warning, the sphere darted upward, zipping toward one of the towering windows. Instead of passing through the glass, it seemed to merge into it, spreading its colors outward like a drop of ink in water. The window, once dark with the night beyond, now shimmered with a moving image, not of the grounds, but of somewhere deep within the castle. They saw a narrow, dust-laden corridor lined with heavy wooden doors, their iron hinges rusted and their surfaces covered in spider webs. The air in the image seemed thick and undisturbed, as if no one had walked there in centuries. At the far end of the corridor, a tall wooden door bore the same four-colored circle they'd seen in the ceiling arch. Hermione exhaled slowly, almost in awe. That's somewhere in Hogwarts, but I've never seen that hallway before. Ron stepped closer to the image, squinting. Maybe it's one of those off-limits bits we never found, like the stuff behind all the trick staircases. Harry nodded toward the symbol on the door. Whatever's behind that. I think it's what the enchantment's leading us to. Before they could say more, the image in the window rippled, and faint words began to appear in the space above it, not written in ink or etched into the glass, but formed from drifting threads of golden light. The language was the same as before, Old High Wizarding. Hermione, already poised with her quill, began to translate aloud. The second path opens when the Founder's light is joined. Seek the hidden four, and the door shall yield. Ron looked utterly baffled. The hidden four? What's that supposed to mean? Hermione tapped her quill against her notes. It could mean 4 people, 4 objects, or even 4 spells, but given the context, I think it's something to do with the Founders themselves. 4 elements, 4 houses, 4... She stopped abruptly. 4 artifacts, of course. Harry's brow furrowed. Artifacts belonging to the Founders? Yes, Hermione said, her voice firm. If this enchantment was created by them, it might require something from each of them to open that door. Ron groaned softly. Great, so we're treasure hunting through the entire castle for things that have been hidden for 1,000 years. Harry allowed himself a faint smile. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The sphere of light pulsed once more, as though approving of Hermione's deduction, then dissolved into a mist of glittering sparks that faded back into the ceiling. The enchanted sky returned to its usual slow drift of codes and stars, but now Harry, Hermione, and Ron could sense that the magic was still present, merely waiting for their next step. The great hall settled back into its quiet nighttime rhythm, but the 3 friends remained at the table, the echo of the vision still vivid in their minds. Somewhere within the sprawling maze of Hogwarts lay a corridor no one alive could remember, a door marked by the unity of the 4 houses, and behind it, something tied to the very origins of the castle. Harry glanced up at the ceiling one last time, the stars winking down at him with what felt like knowing patience. This was no ordinary enchantment. It was an invitation. The image in the great hall window had long since faded, yet the memory of it lingered between them. The narrow, forgotten corridor, the dust that lay thick as frost, and the door marked with the Founder's 4-colored circle. Even as the enchantment above returned to its slow drift of clouds and stars, Harry, Hermione, and Ron felt that the castle itself was still watching them, waiting. The next morning dawned soft and gray, a fine mist curling over the grounds and seeping into the edges of the castle walls. Breakfast in the great hall carried the usual low hum of conversation, but for the 3 of them, every glance toward the enchanted ceiling felt like a shared secret. Though it showed the ordinary pale light of a cloudy sky, they knew now that it could change at any moment, revealing the next piece of the puzzle. Hermione kept her voice low, as she unfolded a neat list she'd made over tea in the common room the night before. "I've written down every known founder-related artifact that's still somewhere in the castle, or at least rumored to be." Ron peered over her shoulder at the parchment. "Half of these sound like bedtime stories." "They might be," Hermione replied with a small knowing smile, "but every legend has a kernel of truth, and in this case we need 4 kernels." Harry studied the list. Some were obvious: Godric Gryffindor's sword, Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem. Others were more obscure: a Slytherin ring said to have been worn by Salazar himself, and a Hufflepuff carving hidden somewhere in the kitchens. They decided to start with what was closest, the Hufflepuff carving. It was late in the afternoon when the 3 of them made their way down the familiar, warmly lit corridor that led to the kitchens. The portraits along the wall greeted them in their usual cheerful manner, though a few seemed to watch more curiously than normal, as if they could sense the quiet urgency beneath the trio's casual stroll. Inside, the kitchen bustled with its usual activity. The house elves worked in perfect harmony, their small hands moving quickly but without rush, preparing trays of food that would soon ascend to the great hall. The rich aroma of baking bread and roasting vegetables wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. Harry and Ron let Hermione take the lead, knowing she had the best way with the elves. She approached a particularly kind-looking elf with enormous eyes and a spotless apron. "We were wondering," Hermione began gently, "if there's an old carving here, perhaps made of wood or stone, with a badger on it?" The elf's ears twitched, and a slow smile spread across its face. "Ah, yes, miss," it said in a voice as soft as buttercream. "We know of such a carving. Very old, very precious. It hides in plain sight." They were led to a corner of the kitchen where a great wooden pillar supported one of the massive beams above. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, the wood worn smooth from centuries of touch. But when the elf brushed away a layer of soot from the cooking hearth nearby, the faint outline of a badger emerged, carved into the pillar with delicate care. The carving glowed faintly as they drew closer, as though recognizing their arrival. A soft hum, the same as the one from the sphere in the great hall, filled the air for just a moment, then faded. Hermione's eyes shone. "That's one," she whispered. Ron reached out to touch it, and for an instant, the badger seemed to shift, as if nodding in greeting, before returning to stillness. They thanked the elves and stepped book on into the corridor, the warm smells of the kitchen following them. The next clue on Hermione's list was far less inviting: the Slytherin ring. According to her research, it was rumored to be sealed in a small stone box hidden in the dungeons, behind a wall that only revealed itself under moonlight. That meant waiting until evening. The hours between passed quietly, the day's ordinary classes feeling somehow softer, as though the castle itself was allowing them this momentary peace before the next step. By the time night fell, the moon had risen in a clean arc across a sky swept clear of clouds. The dungeons were cool and damp, the faint drip of water echoing down the long stone halls. Their footsteps were muted on the worn flagstones, and the air carried the faint scent of mineral and old parchment from the potions stores nearby. They found the spot Hermione had marked on her map, a narrow section of wall between two unused storerooms. In the silvery light spilling through a small, high window, faint runes began to glimmer. Slowly, they resolved into the outline of a small rectangle. Harry pressed his fingers to the cold stone, and the rectangle gave way, sinking inward to reveal a shallow niche. Inside lay the box, small, plain, and bound with a strip of tarnished silver. When Hermione touched it, the metal warmed slightly under her hand, and for a moment she could swear she heard a faint hiss, not threatening, but almost approving. She carefully tucked the box into her satchel, and the runes on the wall faded once more into plain stone. By the time they returned to the common room, they were too tired for much talk, but each of them felt the same quiet certainty. They were halfway to whatever the ceiling's vision was guiding them toward. That night, as Harry drifted to sleep, the memory of the Great Hall's stars rearranging themselves played softly in his mind, like the echo of a song. Somewhere deep in the castle, the other two artifacts waited, and though they didn't yet know how all the pieces would fit together, the journey itself felt as though it was awakening something old and watchful within Hogwarts, something that had been waiting for them far longer than they could imagine. The fire in the Gryffindor common room had burned low, casting a warm orange glow across the worn armchairs and the scattered remains of their books and notes. Outside, the wind sighed through the castle's high towers, carrying with it the faint creak of old stone and wood, a sound that in Hogwarts could mean the building was simply settling, or that it was quietly shifting in ways only the truly attentive noticed. Harry sat back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams, letting the soft warmth of the fire lull his thoughts into a steady rhythm. They had found 2 of the 4 artifacts the enchantment hinted at, the Hufflepuff carving in the kitchens, and the Slytherin ring sealed in the dungeons. 2 remained. Hermione, curled in the corner, with parchment spread around her like the petals of an open flower, tapped the end of her quill against her chin. The next is the easiest to locate, but possibly the hardest to approach: Gryffindor's sword. Ron perked up, half asleep as he was. Well, Harry's already pulled it out of a hat before. Literally, Hermione smiled faintly. Yes, but that was under extraordinary circumstances. The sword doesn't just appear because we want it to. It appears when it's needed. She paused, glancing at Harry, which makes me wonder, maybe this whole journey is the need the sword will answer. Harry didn't answer immediately. There was a weight to that thought. He remembered the feel of the sword in his hand, how it had seemed to hum with something older than the castle itself. If the sword's meant to help us open that door, he said slowly, then it'll find us. We just have to be ready. Ron gave a wry chuckle. So we wait around and hope a bit of metal turns up? Not exactly, Hermione replied patiently. We put ourselves where it's most likely to appear. Think of places where the sword has been before, times when courage was tested, when the castle itself seemed to call for it. That thought took root among them. For Gryffindor's sword, they would place themselves in moments that asked for bravery, not reckless, showy acts, but quiet, decisive ones. The next day, after lessons, they set out without a fixed destination. The castle guided them as it often did, with small, subtle nudges, a staircase that shifted at just the right moment to set them on a different floor, a door that creaked open into a corridor they hadn't intended to walk down. By early evening, they found themselves in a long, empty hallway lined with suits of armor. The torches flickered softly, casting rippling shadows across the polished steel. At the far end stood a window, the last light of the day streaming through and tinting the stones with gold. There was nothing overtly dangerous here, no lurking creature or hidden trap, and yet something about the quiet called to them. "Feels like the castle's watching," Ron murmured. Harry stepped forward, the hush pressing gently around him. He reached the final suit of armor, its visor angled down as though it were studying the floor. Slowly, he touched the hilt of the sword that the armor gripped, ornamental, of course, and yet, in that instant, he felt a faint warmth. The warmth spread up his hand, into his arm, and then there was a flash, not bright, but steady, like the moment a candle catches and burns clean. The sword in the armor's grasp shimmered, and before their eyes, its dull, blunted blade transformed into the sharp, gleaming silver they knew so well. Rubies glinted in the hilt. Gryffindor's sword. No fanfare, no burst of light, just the quiet arrival of what was needed. Hermione exhaled as though she'd been holding her breath for hours. "That's 3. Harry carefully lifted the sword from the armor's grasp. It felt weighted as it had before, perfectly balanced, alive in his hand. The metal caught the last light from the window, scattering it into a gentle arc across the walls. The 4th artifact would be the most elusive, Ravenclaw's diadem. They knew its history, and Harry knew more than he'd told them before about where it had been, but retrieving it meant facing a place they'd hoped never to step into again, the Room of Requirement, in the form it had taken during the hunt for Horcruxes. Hermione, ever the strategist, suggested they approach it differently this time. "We're not seeking destruction. We're seeking something the room is willing to give. We must go in as students, not as intruders." The following evening, under the quiet cover of curfew, they made their way to the stretch of blank wall where the door would appear. 3 times they walked past, thinking clearly and respectfully of what they sought. Ravenclaw's diadem, untouched, untainted. On the 3rd pass, the door appeared, smaller than Harry remembered, shaped like the entrance to a private study rather than the sprawling chaos it had once been. Inside, the room was airy, lit with a pale blue glow, shelves lined with neatly ordered relics and books. At the center, atop a carved stand, rested the diadem. Its delicate silverwork caught the light like frost, and the blue gemstone at its heart pulsed faintly, as though it were breathing. They approached slowly. No fire, no shadows leaping to attack, only a stillness that felt like approval. Hermione lifted it with both hands, her touch gentle. The diadem's magic whispered faintly against their minds, not words, but the cool, bright feeling of clear thought. As they stepped back into the corridor, the door to the Room of Requirement faded behind them, and they knew, without speaking, that the 4th piece of the puzzle was now theirs. 4 artifacts, 4 houses, the hidden door in the vision had all it required, except for them to bring these together in the right place at the right moment. The 4 artifacts rested before them on the long table in the Gryffindor common room, their presence filling the quiet space with a weight that was neither heavy nor foreboding, but simply important. The Hufflepuff carving, warm to the touch despite being made of wood, sat to one side. Beside it, the small stone box containing the Slytherin ring gleamed faintly in the firelight. Gryffindor's sword lay lengthwise along the table, its rubies catching the light like embers, and the Ravenclaw diadem rested on a folded piece of cloth, its silver arcs holding the calm brilliance of moonlight. For a long moment, none of them spoke. It was Hermione who finally broke the stillness. "We've brought them together. Now we need to think about where the ceiling wanted us to bring them." Her eyes lifted toward the windows, as though she could see straight through to the great hall below. Harry followed her gaze, and an image returned to him. The vision in the ceiling that had started this journey, the hidden corridor, the door with the circle of the Founder's colors, the quiet hum, like the breath of the castle itself. They knew what they had to do. The 3 of them waited until the castle had grown still for the night, moving through its halls with the kind of practiced ease that came from years of breaking curfew for far less noble causes. The air was cool and dry, the faint scent of beeswax and old parchment drifting from the walls. The moonlight that streamed through the windows seemed to follow them, brushing against the artifacts they carried. The hidden corridor was just as they had found it before, narrow, lined with ancient stone, the dust disturbed only by their earlier footsteps. At its end stood the door, still marked with the faded circle of red, green, blue, and yellow. Harry stepped forward first, Gryffindor's sword in one hand, the other resting lightly on the door. Hermione came next, placing the diadem gently at the center of the circle. Ron set down the carving and the stone box, arranging them so that each artifact aligned with its house's color. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the colors in the circle began to glow, each one brightening in turn until they blended together in a soft white light. The hum returned, deep and resonant, as if the walls themselves were singing. The door eased open without a sound. Inside, the room was unlike anything they had expected. It was round, its walls formed of polished stone that shimmered with shifting patterns, clouds, stars, soft light dancing over a dark surface. In the center stood a low pedestal, and above it, suspended in midair, floated a sphere of magic the size of a quaffle. Within its translucent surface, images moved, the great hall ceiling, the castle grounds, even glimpses of the corridors and classrooms. Hermione stepped forward slowly, her breath caught in wonder. "It's a memory," she whispered. "No, not just a memory, it's the enchantment itself." The sphere pulsed gently, as if acknowledging her. Harry circled the pedestal, his fingers brushing the edge. "It's been here the whole time, hidden by the Founders. This is where the magic of the ceiling is anchored." Ron tilted his head back to look at the walls. The shifting patterns resolved for a moment into a sky much like the one above the Great Hall. But it wasn't just reflecting, it was alive, changing to show things that had happened, things that were happening now, and things that felt like they might happen someday. "Why hide it?" Ron asked quietly. Hermione's gaze softened. "Because it's not just a display, it's a guardian. The ceiling doesn't only mirror the weather, it watches, learns, remembers, and when Hogwarts itself feels a need, it can guide those within it, like it guided us." Harry thought of the visions they'd seen, the corridor, the door, the colors, the artifacts. They hadn't been a test of their ability to collect relics. They had been an invitation to reconnect the magics to the present, to acknowledge all four founders equally. As if in answer to his thoughts, the sphere brightened, and the ceiling of the Great Hall appeared above them in perfect miniature. The stars shimmered, then rearranged themselves into four constellations: a lion, a serpent, a badger, and an eagle, circling one another in perfect harmony. Hermione's voice was almost reverent. "It's telling us the ceiling was never just decoration. It's a reminder that the four houses are meant to work together, to protect and guide the school as one." The realization settled over them like a warm cloak. This wasn't a hidden weapon or a dark secret. It was something quiet, enduring, and deeply kind. The founders' way of ensuring that their unity lived on, even in times when their differences seemed greatest. Harry felt a slow smile tug at his mouth. "So, what now?" Hermione stepped closer to the sphere, laying her hand gently against it. "Now, we let it know it's been found, and that Hogwarts remembers." The sphere's light softened until it was no brighter than a lantern. A feeling spread through the room, not words, but a sensation of welcome, gratitude, and peaceful completion. The shifting sky on the walls faded to a deep, calm blue, as though the magic itself were settling to rest. When they stepped back into the corridor, the door closed behind them with a sound like a sigh. They returned to the common room without hurry, their steps unhurried, the weight of the artifacts now replaced by a quiet certainty that they had done exactly what the castle had hoped they would. And above them, unseen through the stone and wood, the Great Hall's ceiling glowed with a clear night sky, the four constellations still faintly circling, a sign for those who knew to look that Hogwarts was, as always, watching over its own. The castle was at rest when they returned, as though it, too, had drawn a deep breath and settled into sleep. The torches lining the hallways burned low, their flames no more than gentle whispers of light against the cool stone. Harry, Hermione, and Ron moved quietly, not out of fear of being caught. That had long since stopped being their main concern, but because silence felt right, almost necessary. After what they had just experienced, the air seemed softer, warmer, and the lingering echo of the room's magic still clung to them, like the faint scent of a summer night long after you've come indoors. They carried the artifacts back through the familiar corridors, each step unhurried. Gryffindor's sword hung easily in Harry's hand now, not a burden, but a companion. The Ravenclaw diadem, carefully wrapped, rested in Hermione's arms, and Ron cradled both the Slytherin ring and the Hufflepuff carving with a kind of surprising tenderness, as though he understood their value went far beyond age or rarity. When they reached the entrance to the headmistress's office, they paused. It wasn't that they feared explaining. Professor McGonagall had long since learned to trust their instincts, but that the moment deserved to linger just a little longer before the world took it from them. Hermione looked up at the spiral staircase, then down at the artifacts. "We'll return them, of course," she said softly, "but for now, they've done what they were meant to do." Harry nodded, glancing toward the ceiling as if he could see straight through to the great hall below. He wondered if the constellations still spun there, faint and hidden from most eyes, a quiet signal to anyone who might one day notice. They decided to walk the long way back, weaving through corridors that looked different in the quiet of night. The portraits along the walls watched them pass, some curious, some offering sleepy nods, others pretending not to see, as if they too understood this was not the moment for chatter. When they reached the great hall, they paused at the doors. The massive space inside was empty, the tables polished and bare, the air holding the faint scent of beeswax and old wood. Above, the enchanted ceiling stretched endlessly, mirroring the night sky outside, but Harry, Hermione, and Ron saw more than stars. The constellations were still there, faint but distinct. The lion, the serpent, the badger, and the eagle, turning slowly in a circle of perfect balance. It was subtle enough that no passing student would think it anything more than a trick of the light, but to them, it was unmistakable. "It's peaceful," Hermione whispered, almost to herself. Ron gave a small grin. "Feels like the castle's happy, you know? Like it's got its family together again." They stood there for a few minutes longer, letting the stillness wrap around them. The night outside was clear, and the air in the great hall seemed to hold a faint coolness, like the breath of the sky itself. Eventually, they turned and left, making their way back toward the common room. The Gryffindor fire had burned low, leaving the room awash in a gentle amber glow. Without speaking, they set the artifacts carefully on a side table, each of them instinctively handling their piece with reverence. Hermione eased into one of the armchairs, pulling her knees up under her and letting her gaze drift to the flames. Ron slouched into the seat opposite her, rubbing the back of his neck with a sleepy smile. Harry took the seat by the window, the cool glass against his arm, as he looked out over the quiet grounds. For a while, there was no need for conversation. The work was done. The mystery, once a quiet question whispered in the shifting light of the great hall's ceiling, had been answered, not with a loud revelation, but with something gentler, deeper. Finally, Hermione spoke, her voice barely more than a sigh. "I think that's the thing about this place. Hogwarts doesn't just teach magic, it remembers, and sometimes it asks us to remember too." Harry's eyes drifted shut, the thought settling warmly in his mind. The fire crackled softly. The walls seemed to hum with that faint, living magic, and somewhere far above, the ceiling of the great hall reflected the night with quiet pride. When sleep finally came for them, it was easy, untroubled, and filled with dreams of starlight, ancient voices, and a castle that cared for them as much as they had cared for it. Long after the common room had gone still and the fire had faded to a warm, golden ember, the castle remained quietly awake. Its stone walls, ancient and enduring, seemed to breathe with a slow rhythm, the same steady heartbeat that had carried through centuries of laughter, learning, and whispered secrets. Up in the dormitories, Harry, Hermione, and Ron slept deeply, each wrapped in dreams that felt like gentle gifts from the castle itself, not grand adventures or dangerous duels, but soft, lingering images. A ceiling full of constellations turning lazily in the night, the warmth of candlelight spilling across polished tables, the faint echo of footsteps belonging to those who had walked these halls long before them. Outside, the sky was perfectly clear. The stars shimmered above the turrets and towers, their light spilling over the dark silhouette of Hogwarts like a protective veil. And in the great hall, the enchanted ceiling reflected every detail, the silvery glow of the moon, the deep velvet of the heavens, and, if one looked closely enough, the faint shimmer of 4 constellations still circling one another in patient harmony. They were not there for spectacle. They were there as a promise, a reminder that the magic binding this place together was older than any single wizard, older even than the founders themselves. It was a magic that thrived on unity, on the simple truth that the castle's heart beat strongest when all its houses stood side by side. Somewhere deep within its walls, the quiet room where the sphere of magic floated remained untouched. Its soft blue glow pulsed gently, like the tide lapping against a shore, at peace in its secrecy. It did not need to be seen to do its work. It simply was. And so the castle rested, its dreams curling through the corridors like soft mist, brushing over portraits, empty classrooms, and the sleeping faces of those it sheltered. Hogwarts had kept its secret for centuries, and now it had been remembered, not to be displayed in triumph, but to be cherished in the way one holds onto a quiet truth. If you are listening now, perhaps you can feel it too, that subtle hum beneath the stillness, that warmth that seems to reach out and settle over you like a blanket. It is the same magic that has always lived here, and it will remain, watching, protecting, and gently guiding until morning comes. And as you drift into sleep, imagine yourself beneath that endless ceiling, stars wheeling slowly overhead, the castle standing guard, timeless, patient, and full of quiet wonder.